I totally agree. And that's a good segue into talking about growing your own, because
Mhm.
in this section here of my book, there's a page called Gardening Tips and Resources. And number 5 here is befriend your fellow gardeners and get to know your neighbors. This is a big one. I should have actually put this up at number 1, because before you even plant, before you even decide what to do with your land, it's a great idea to just walk around your neighborhood and try to see if you can see any other gardens, because you might get some really good ideas. First of all, you might go, oh my God, they're growing peaches. I didn't know you can grow peaches in Vermont.
Mhm. All right, cool, man. So, yeah, thank you for joining me today. I have Seth. Seth is a very interesting person in that he is in and around what the Garden of Eden, could potentially be, if we were to rebuild it now. So he has something to say, and a lot of it revolves around fruit. Seth, you wrote a book. I have a copy of it, and I have your updated copy called The Fruit Companion, and it gets into fruits. It's funny, a lot of people don't even know what the definition of a fruit is. If you told them certain things were fruits, they might think it's not a fruit. And yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to get you on in particular is that I was talking to you behind the scenes about building this community that is sustainable, and I know that you have experience with fruits and growing fruits and being around like food forest type environments, and that's one of the major components of what I'm trying to do. So I wanted to get you on, but before we get into all that stuff, do you want to just give us like a quick intro, and then maybe how you got into, your love of fruit in general and food?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, hey, everybody, I'm Seth. For most of my life, I was a musician by trade, and that was my main passion. And a few years ago, I decided to change gears a little bit and get more into agriculture and growing food. But my love for fruit started way, way before that. My mom likes to tell the story that as a child, she would bring my brothers and I to the grocery store, and she would allow my brothers to, she would allow us all to pick out something we wanted. So my brothers would get some junk food, and I would always pick out some new colorful vegetable or fruit. So ever since I was a kid, I was naturally drawn toward what I called adult food, because I saw a difference between kind of the homemade meals my mom prepared and some of the packaged stuff that she would make for the kids. And I said, I want adult food. And I would always be attracted to peppers and fruit and apples and peaches. So my love for fruit started a very long time ago, but recently I learned how to forage. I started foraging more. I started foraging for figs in New Orleans when I lived there. And so fast forward to a few years ago, I moved to Florida, South Florida. I moved straight to a mango farm because I really wanted to learn how to grow my own food. And the mango farm taught me a lot, especially about tropical fruit and the fruit we have here in South Florida. I live a little bit south of Miami. And since then, I've just been foraging more and unlocking the bounty, the abundance, the provision that God has given us. And I'm learning how we can interact with that. And in short, the instructions are right there on the first few pages of the Bible in Genesis, where God plants a garden and commands us to basically maintain it. And so now everywhere I go, I see God's garden. We may be cast out of the garden, figuratively speaking, but I do see Mother Nature around me as the Garden of Eden, and we can just choose to step back into it. So
Yeah.
I wrote the Fruit Companion book real quick. I'll finish it up. I wrote the Fruit Companion book, which you beautifully have displayed behind you. And it's a guide for the consumer, because when I started eating more fruits and vegetables, which coincided right when I started moving to Florida, I started eating primarily fruit-based diet, a lot of great things happened. I just learned so much about how to pick them out. So that's why I wrote the Fruit Companion. It's a guide. It's everything I learned in the first 5 years of eating a fruit-based diet. And I wanted to help everybody sort of access the abundance that I was experiencing everywhere I went.
Yeah, I think it's really good to get books when you're like foraging, obviously, is one where people will get books, and then it'll open up a paradigm. But I think tying it back to what you said as a kid all the way to now, the way people eat, and with what I'm trying to do, a lot of this stuff is mindset. It's like we have been trained, brainwashed, trauma-based mind control, whatever you want to call it, but we've been trained to live a certain way. And a lot of it is you really can't see what's right in front of your face because you've been blinded to it. And I would encourage people, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is like a paradigm shift, especially when you talk about not eating certain foods. But yeah, I would just encourage people like to reshape the way that they look at food in general. And when you were a kid looking at packaged foods, it's almost like they're mimicking like the shiny packaging. They're purposefully mimicking what God has created in nature. And then to tie that back, I did see your quote, Genesis 1:29, but if you go to the New Testament, and we were kicked out of the garden, but we have a new covenant now, thank God. And in Matthew 6:26 is when Jesus is doing the Sermon on the Mount, and he basically says, the birds are out and they eat of the plenty, and they don't have to forage, they don't have to store. I provide all that is needed. So I think, going back to the beginning and back to our new covenant, it's pretty clear that this is a pathway that's viable to provide food. And so I guess from there, one thing I wanted to just touch on is God's beautiful bounty. And what is your thoughts on food, the way you eat and what you eat, and spirituality? Because I know that for me is a big one, and I know that with every paradigm shift comes kind of like a spiritual shift and awakening as well.
That's a great question. To me, when I hear spirituality or spirit, I think of the animated life force in somebody. And, that kind of goes back to the word spire, which means to breathe. And so to me, an animal that can breathe is not food. Now, I know that fruits breathe in a way. They emit gases. They absorb things. In a way, they have a gaseous, exhalation process. But they don't breathe in the traditional sense. They're not imbued with animus, right? The animated soul. And so how the intersection of spirituality and food, I think right at the intersection is where I stand as a vegan, where I don't eat animal products and I don't rely on any food that exploits animals to produce it. So I know all the counter arguments to that. Don't you know how many insects you kill with traditional agriculture? It's like, yes, all of that can be addressed. It's a bit of a different issue because now you're talking about industrial farming, which is not the Garden of Eden. So I practice what I call the Genesis 1:29 diet, or the Garden of Eden diet, or Genesis diet, whatever you want to call it. The Kingdom of Heaven diet, as you have it there, because it doesn't rely on any death. It only promotes life. And the last thing I'll say on this is when you eat a fruit, you're not killing the plant because the tree still stands, right? There's mango trees all around me that pump out hundreds of mangoes per season, but that tree remains alive. Not to mention you're given a seed to then propagate if you wish. So fruit is life promoting, and flesh is life taking. So I think that's kind of where I see the differences between foods as it relates to spirituality.
Yeah, and I would just say to anyone, I the way I see it, I try not to I go back and forth myself. I mean, I have a large family, and we've done all different types of diet for spiritual reasons. And I don't want to condemn anyone. I know there's different arguments, biblical for eating meat and not eating meat. I've heard them all as well myself. But I would like people to just consider, and for me personally, the way I look at it is like levels of consciousness. And I don't think anyone could argue that eating primarily fruit from the tree, raw as it is in nature, is like the highest consciousness level of eating. I think it'd be pretty hard to argue that. Then you get into like convenience and nutrition, and people have all different types of arguments. So not to alienate anyone from the conversation, but just consider, what Seth is saying here is like, it's just so the tree doesn't die. It gives you the fruit. It regrows the fruit. It gives you the seed. It is kind of like the highest form of eating, ingesting something for your sustenance, so to say. So yeah, just for anyone listening, like don't get triggered by that and like run away. It's just just a statement of truth, a statement of fact. It doesn't, no judgment involved. So yeah. One thing, what came up when you said that is interesting. As a builder, I was thinking, you look at all the old world buildings, right? They're built of masonry. And even some of the buildings, I work in historic restoration, like you'll find wood building products, but I wonder if like at a certain point in time they were building mostly with masonry because they weren't like killing off, like deforesting and things of that nature, and they were thinking sustainably, to not destroy nature, and then they built with masonry, steel, and glass because they weren't killing things. Very interesting to think about.
Well, those materials will last longer too. So with a wooden structure, you might have to replace it once it rots. But yeah, with what do you call it, masonry and steel and glass, you don't.
Yeah, the stuff we build now is literally, it's built for like five years plus, and then like tear it down. It's all the least expensive, least quality. That's our mindset as humanity right now. So yeah, looping that in, we can get into some fruit stuff now if you want, and then I want to talk about like food foresting combined with living, like as a combination type deal, and what you as a farmer and in the agriculture industry, some realistic advice for what that would look like and how much work that would take, et cetera, et cetera. But if you want to dive more into the book and into some examples of fruits and stuff like that, we could do that now too.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about the book because I do think fruits offer the greatest potential for sustainability, yield, enjoyment, things like that. And I will say too, I don't eat 100% fruit. A lot of people think I do because I speak so highly of it, but I eat all plants. So fruit primarily.
Yeah, I mean, you got herbs. There's a lot that goes into plants.
Right. And in addition, what I consider the Genesis 129 diet to be is more than just food. It involves spiritual food as well. Because as you know, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that God commanded. So living in obedience to God's will is part of my diet, so to speak.
Amen.
And so is cleansing myself in living water and appreciating the air, water, and sun just as much as the food I'm eating.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. We're in Florida now too. We're up in Northeast Florida, coming from New England, just appreciating the sun and kind of like giving into the sun. In New England, the sun is like, it's there in the summer times, and it's kind of like, 2 months out of the year, you'll get some heavy sun, and you kind of like avoid it. When you're in Florida, you have to embrace the sun. And especially when we're like fasting or eating super clean, it's almost like you get more value out of the sun. It's interesting that there is a very strong relationship between breathing, sun, and eating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sun is some very powerful energy for sure. Well, maybe I can share my screen and show some pages of the Fruit Companion, give people an inside peek here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So this is sort of what the PDF looks like if you were to get the digital version. Here's just a page sort of in the intro section called Why Eat Fruit? You know, and I won't read the whole thing, but I laid out all the reasons why fruit is the ideal source of food for human beings. You know, it's whole. We eat them in their whole state. They require no processing whatsoever. They're highly appealing to our senses visually, olfactorily. Taste buds light up when we eat fruit. And if people don't like certain fruit, it's probably because you haven't had it fully ripe. A lot of people say, oh, I don't like honeydew melon. It's always crunchy and bland. Well, honeydew melon is actually one of the sweetest melons out there. I don't know if people knew that. So if you got one truly ripe, it would be very soft, dripping with juice, and as sweet as ice cream, basically. So if you're not experiencing that with the honeydew, then what you're eating is not ripe. And I would encourage you to find some good local stuff in season to really, truly experience the taste bud explosion that happens with almost every fruit in this book. Even cucumbers, ones that you think have no flavor whatsoever. I've been eating a lot of those just plain. And it's a subtle flavor, but they're so delicious. So they're so appealing to our senses. They're all easy on the digestion. And why? It's because they're mostly water and fiber and sugar, which is super easy for the body to digest. Sugar doesn't require any enzymes like starch enzymes or, amylase or lactase to break it down into sugar. It's already sugar, so the body can uptake it completely naturally and easily. It's nourishing. It's full of carbs. It's non-violent. We spoke about that. It's free. Now, if you have a fruit tree, which it may cost $80 to buy a fruit tree in a 15-gallon pot, but once you install that in your yard, it might give you fruit every single year for decades.
Not to mention seeds. So it's actually infinity free.
Right, because then you can go propagate those trees from the seeds.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Or a lot of times we propagate fruit from the cutting. There's processes like air layering where you scar a branch of a tree, pack dirt around it, and you fool that branch into thinking it's now in the ground. It starts to root. You cut it and then you stick it in the ground. It already has roots and it takes off to another tree. You can also graft, and you can also just cut branches or vines and stick those in the ground, and they will root. Like tomatoes will do that. So fruits are extremely sustainable.
Going to seed.
I'm sorry?
It's a little quicker. It's like a shortcut. Yeah.
Yes, it's like cloning the fruit instead of reproducing it.
Yeah.
And fruit trees are no-till. That's one of the big arguments that people will say against a plant-based diet is that you have to constantly till the ground and disrupt the ecosystem. Well, maybe that's true with conventional farming when it comes to grain and vegetables, but we're not talking about conventional farming with grains and vegetables. We're talking about, futuristic Edenic food forests that have permanent trees everywhere as part of a permaculture, a permanent ecosystem. So trees do not require you to till the ground every season. All right. And they're non-toxic fruit, meaning unless they're sprayed with a pesticide or something unnaturally, we're not talking about that, just a fruit in its pure form. If it's ripe, it has absolutely no anti-nutrients or toxins, generally speaking. So that's how I like to open the book, to give us a peek as to why I should even continue reading. And why fruit deserves a book all by itself. It deserves many, and this is just one. But any questions on these before we move on?
No, I think we covered a little bit of it, like talking about the no-till and kind of commercial farming. I think that is like a huge motivator for me because once again, another topic I talk about a lot is like energy production, and that's a big hot topic. The cost of energy, where our energy comes from, whether you're burning something that's giving off carbon dioxide emissions, things of that nature. And everything becomes more sustainable, which is like a buzzword, when you produce it locally. Like within the area of where it's needed, because then you don't have to transmit it. And then once again, the whole reason for commercial agriculture is because we're getting the most yield of some sort of, macronutrient and shipping it all over the place. It's an industrial process. It's a total paradigm shift. This is local. It's enough to sustain, it's built to the size needed to sustain the amount of people who it's meant to sustain. I mean, obviously you can scale up, but what I'm kind of talking about is permaculture, food foresting. And yeah, I just think a lot of people don't, when I bring this up to people, they don't see it as viable, possible things of that nature. But I just want people to understand how it's not just viable, it's actually probably what we're meant to be doing. So just, yeah, a little bit on that portion of it. But yeah, go on.
Well, I totally agree. Again, I'm going to mention the Genesis 129 diet again, because I have a conception of what this entails. It's not just fruit. It's not just obeying God's word, but it's also local food and a localized food system and growing your own in some way. So, and I have it accessible for anyone. If you don't have any soil, any land, any yard space whatsoever, no opportunity to plant a tree, there are still ways to grow your own foods by starting with maybe just sprouting seeds.
Mm-hmm.
I always have a lentil or mung bean or broccoli sprouts going, so that way I can have living food in my kitchen, and I don't need any soil to do that whatsoever. I just use a jar and water. So, and then as far as fruit pertains to a local food system, ideally it would all be local. But since we still have harsh winters in some places, and we do have such a wide and large scale planetary food system, we might as well continue throwing jackfruits on those trucks and cargo planes to get to the north until we have everything sorted out. So I'm not against using long distance transportation for some fruits and vegetables, because wouldn't it be nice to have some pineapple in Massachusetts, when if we can, especially when there's not as many apples or whatever available. So the ideal is local, but in the meantime, I think we can do what we need to do, which may include, bringing a jackfruit from Thailand to the middle of Ohio or something like that.
I'm a big proponent of utilizing ancient principles in combination with current technology. So I think allopathic medicine is getting a bad rap now, because obviously they're basically throwing drugs at everything and trying to give you surgeries that aren't necessary. But we still do have the most state-of-the-art surgery, brain surgery, bone healing, all that trauma kind of allopathic medicine, which I think we should embrace that. If you get into a really bad car accident or something like that, yeah, don't say no to going to the hospital and getting brain surgery, but at the same time utilize ancient techniques for homeopathy and things of that nature. Same thing with food, 100%. I'm not against the system, but it would be nice if these micro communities popped up and we were getting our food in more of a network, as opposed to a top-down corporate pyramid structure. But like you said, I mean, we got to work with what we got. So
100%. So I have some other parts of the book where there's tips about growing your own and sourcing and organic versus conventional. But the majority of the book is about, we dive into individual fruits, as you know, and sort of describe when they're ripe and in season. So would you like me to just pick a few that we could dive into and talk about?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Was there any fruit that you particularly liked?
I don't know. I'm a big fan of just mangoes, avocados. Okay. Those are kind of my go-to. Yeah.
The first one you said, mango, is a sub-acid fruit, which
Mm-hmm.
means that it has a sort of semi-equal balance of acids and sugar. That's what makes it a sub-acid. It's both sweet and it's a little tart.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of fruit in the world that we have access to is sub-acid, because they all have some combination of sweetness, a little bit of sugar, and acid, a little bit of tartness, whether that's a ascorbic acid, or a citric acid, or the malic acid, excuse me, is ascorbic acid naturally occurring, or is it just a preservative? I know that malic acid is sort of what's in high quantities in apples. Citric acid is in citrus, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You get the idea. So
Yeah.
if we were to zoom in on mango, here's our page on mangoes, for example. There's some warnings that I have to advise people about if they warrant one. So for mango, it has two, actually. And I'll get to those. But let me introduce mango from the beginning. It's climacteric. Now, what does that mean? Fruits fall into either one of two or maybe three categories: climacteric, non-climacteric, and somewhere in the middle. And what that means is climacteric means that the fruit ripens further once you pick it. So right now I have these mangoes sitting outside my place on the bench, ripening because they're hard still. And you don't want to eat them because they're not tasty. They're not ripe. But they were mature enough to be picked off the tree. Okay, so a mango, since it's climacteric, it continues to produce ethylene gas. It continues to get softer. It continues to get sweeter in this beautiful chemical transformation it undergoes as it perfectly ripens for our enjoyment, right? So as you can see, the other fruits on this page, papaya and pawpaw, are also climacteric, meaning you can pick them a little green. Okay, and then within a few days, or depending how long, maybe a week, those fruits will get more colorful. They'll round into their full color. They'll get sweeter. The starches will break down into sugar. These acids will break down into sugar, and we're going to get a sweet, ripe, soft fruit once it's fully ripe. So that's what climacteric means, okay? A lot of fruits, particularly the acid section, the acid fruits, like all citrus, are non-climacteric. So if you pick those, you better make sure they're ripe already, because they're not going to really change in state once they're picked. And that's a concept that's familiar because we know about bananas. We know you can buy bananas green, right, and set them out to ripen, but we never really think about that in terms of other fruit. So every fruit falls into one of these categories, except, like I said, the ones that are the exceptions, that kind of lean. They might be in one bucket, but they lean toward the other one. And I'll just give you one example of that, which is pineapple. You can pick pineapple a little early, a little green, and you can notice a color change. So I put it in the non-climacteric with climacteric tendencies category. And I'm sorry if this is confusing for people. In essence, pineapple won't get fully sweet if you pick it early, but it can change a little bit. All right.
Now, is this something where like commercial farming kind of games the system a little bit? Because I do hear people complain about, like, picking it way before it's ripe and then doing something to like force it to ripen and things like that. Is there anything to watch out for when you're buying fruit? Yeah.
So commercial bananas, for example, are picked terribly early and then sprayed with an ethylene gas or other gases to help them ripen during transport. Because if we picked bananas when they were truly tree ripe, they would not last in transport to get to us. So yes, you're totally right. The industry games the system by doing artificial things to make them ripen by the time they get to our countertop, right? And mango too, probably. I don't know the exact ins and outs because I've never worked in an industrial fruit environment, and I don't work in the fruit shipping business. So, I'm not sure to what extent mangoes are sprayed with ripening agents, for example. I just don't know. Pawpaws probably never will be because you don't see those in the commercial fruits market. Pawpaws are generally foraged because they're just not a known marketable fruit in the general.
Yeah, you're good. You're good for some unknown fruits. If anyone wants to see some wild fruits, follow Seth's Instagram page. He's always coming up. I'm like, what is that? Where do I find that? And then if I see something at the local market, I'm like, oh, I found one. You can always have fun with that. There's so many fruits. Like there's
so many.
You wouldn't even know.
Totally, man. Let me finish talking about the warnings on these, and then I'll show another super rare one people may not have heard of, but it may actually be in their backyard. All right.
Cool.
So the two warnings I have for mangoes are, one, there's an oil that drips from the sap. It's from the stem or from the branches. And working on a mango farm for a year and a half, I never experienced this sap that tends to burn the skin. So there's a toxin in the sap called urushiol, which is the same as poison ivy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it burns the skin. I never experienced it in South Florida until about 4 days ago.
Wow.
Okay, so I bought a mango from a roadside vendor, and she must have just picked it because it was still dripping this latex. Excuse me, not quite latex. It's this clear, whitish, sticky stuff that has a poison in it. And I know that because it burned my arm. As I took it out of my bag, it sort of squirted on me. I don't know if you can see that. There you go.
Bit. Yeah.
So now I know that the mango sap thing it can burn your skin. It kind of depends on A, the variety, B, how early you picked it. So I think she picked it significantly early because it still hasn't ripened up. So we'll see if it even does. But the third variable would be how sensitive you are to these things. If you're not allergic to poison ivy, you may not be allergic to the mango sap.
And if you're not allergic to poison ivy, I'm jealous of you because I'm heavily allergic and we are not friends. My wife is not allergic. It irks me every time we go out. She's like not careless, not worried at all.
Well, yeah, you got to keep your eyes peeled for that stuff. So that's one thing that I say, just beware. There's some mango sap. If you ever go pick mangoes and you break them off the tree, make sure you pick away from you. Mm-hmm. If you pick toward yourself, it could squirt right in your eye. And you do not want mango sap in your eye. That's the worst day you've had in a while. So if you ever go pick from the tree, pick away from you. But the best way to pick a mango is off the ground, because it will just fall when it's ripe. The first year I lived on the mango farm, that first summer, I would sleep with my trailer door open, and I could hear the birds, I could hear nature, I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, and every now and then I would hear which was a mango falling off its branch, crashing through a couple leaves before it hit the ground. And it would just give me the biggest smile because I knew in the morning I'd get up with the box, walk around, and basically play, Easter egg hunting. I'm looking down at the ground under the bushes for red, purple, yellow, green, pink, these beautiful mango colors. They literally look like eggs too, the big ones. And I fill a box and I go have breakfast. So that's some of the beauty of having lived on a mango farm. That was such a great time. And then the second warning I have about these are, a lot of them are irradiated. It's a form of basically like pasteurization to kill fungus or mold that might grow on the fruit. And so it's very common right now. You'll see a lot of Hayden mangoes in the markets. And if you look carefully on the PLU sticker, they'll say irradiated. And I just put that as a warning to say, hey, if you're truly only trying to eat completely unprocessed, raw food, you might want to be aware of this and avoid them. Personally, I don't mind eating irradiated fruit like a Hayden mango, especially if it's the only mango I can get. And, I haven't noticed any ill effects from consuming mangoes that have been irradiated. So I felt ill effects from consuming mangoes that are underripe, and I've felt ill effects from consuming food that isn't fruit, from consuming like heavy cooked food with oil and salt and things like that. I felt ill effects from that more than I've ever felt bad from eating a mango that was irradiated. Although I did feel the need to just put the warning there for anyone who was curious.
Cool.
Yeah. And then I have some, the ripe when, and what season it's in and the water content for these fruits. I think that's very important to know the water content. What you'll find is that they're mostly between 75% and 96%. 75% is sort of the lowest cutoff that the human body wants to deal with anything, because the human body is in its essence 75% water. I know it can get much lower, the older we get and the more dehydrated we get. But water is life, and it's the most important part of the food, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people are dehydrated and they're drinking water, like distilled water, or wherever they get their water, it doesn't have anything in it. Electrolytes. A lot of people add salt now to their water, but when you get water from fruit, it has all of the nutrients and electrolytes in the water that you're ingesting. So you kind of, it's almost, drinking water in some ways is almost not good for you, like just straight distilled water, unless you're purposely trying to detox or something like that. Whereas when you get water from a fruit, like even if you, like you said, cucumbers, if you just juiced cucumber and that's what you drank, you would have, it's like 10 times better than Gatorade. It would have all the nutrients and electrolytes that you need.
Yeah, cucumber juice is powerful. And it's interesting you mentioned that one, because cucumber is the #1 most hydrated fruit. It has 96% water. That's higher than any other fruit, higher than watermelon. Watermelon's about, between 93 and 95, maybe 94. But cucumber, #1 juiciest fruit, but it's not juicy in the sense that it drips on you.
Right.
Why is that? It's because the cell walls are tough. So it just has thicker cell walls, but it actually has more fruit than a juicy peach. It has more, cucumbers have more water than a peach, more water than a grape, more water than a mango, more water than a watermelon. Cucumbers are the #1. Let me just fast forward to those. So I like to show a couple varieties per fruit. And here with cucumber, we have 5 different ones. I love cucumbers. They're really easy to grow too.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing. If you live, especially in the north, they're a great fruit to produce in the summertime. I used to grow them in like a Tupperware container or one of those big totes you would like put clothes in or something. Yep. Or a tote to put anything in. Poked holes in it, filled it with soil, and planted cucumbers. And they would just sprawl out the yard, or they climb up a trellis. And they love sun, they love water, and they grow pretty quick.
Yeah, I'd just like to say real quick to interject, wherever you are, to your point, if you have no soil and stuff like that, if you have a balcony or you can grow in a raised bed or a pot, anything at all, it's very empowering. Just having a garden and growing stuff and being able to eat the fruit that you grew. Obviously you can get into homesteading, greenhouses, things of that nature, but just growing stuff. And you also kind of see how, I know some people I talk to are like, it's not easy. My garden like died and this and that, but it is relatively easy, especially when you do a raised bed and you're putting your own soil amendments in there and you don't have to worry about whatever you're getting from the ground locally. It's relatively easy to grow a lot of different stuff. So I would encourage anyone to just start a small garden, just to get in the habit.
Yeah. And, not everyone picks it up as easily the first time. So don't get discouraged. If a few plants die, sometimes it just takes time to get used to a watering schedule, making sure the soil is happy, that there's enough sun and shade. So, it takes a little trial and error. Like anything, we get better with time and practice. So I think people who say, "Oh, I kill every plant that I've ever tried to take care of," it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's like, well, if you keep telling that story, maybe that'll keep happening. But you don't have to live there. You can actively just get better and improve and learn as you go. So yeah, guys, plant stuff and don't give up and just keep going. Now, one thing I don't like about cucumbers, finding them in the store, is that they're often waxed. And that's the warning I have for these guys here, is that, if you want to get the most high quality cucumbers, you got to get them in season. You have to just get them in season locally down the street from your neighbor or from a farmer's market, or grow them yourself, right?
One thing I would really like to say, that's, you already mentioned it, but really valuable about this book, is knowing what's in season, because, you know, in New England, you kind of know it's like corn season, apple season. There's these very like staple foods that, you know, you can pick up at the side of the road market. But down here in Florida, like, we actively go ask, like, we go to the farmers markets and stuff. We're like, what's in season? And there's I feel like there's like overlapping seasons too in Florida, and then you have stuff coming down from Georgia, and where we are in Florida, we have stuff coming up from South Florida. So
Yeah.
knowing what's in season ahead of time, be like, oh, when are these going to be here? You know, you kind of like get first in line for some stuff sometimes that that's not as abundant, and it is very helpful to know when things grow and when they're going to be ready.
Yeah, you know, and if you live in South Florida and you're reading my book or referencing it, you got to be aware that some of the seasonality is not going to line up, because South Florida has such a warm climate. You know, I wrote this book for the person living in the temperate zone, for the person living, you know, in the north essentially, and who gets to just the classic growing seasons where you get tomatoes and cucumbers in the summer.
Yep.
Now in Florida, in South Florida where I'm at, we get cucumbers and tomatoes in February. And I love that. You just can't really use the seasons in my book to see where your locality is going to be popping.
Yeah.
So yeah, South Florida and the tropics are a little bit different. And if you live in South Florida, the tropics, you know, you could definitely use my book when it comes to the grocery store. Because in the grocery store, you see those common seasons come around just like everywhere else, where you see more tomatoes in the summer and you do see more oranges in the winter. So that's the beauty of fruit too, is the seasonality, is that it keeps changing. You know, there's, like you said, there's overlapping seasons. You know, before starfruit season's even over, you know, loquats start to come in, and before loquat season's over, the mulberries come in, and before that's over, like these start to come in, and it's so beautiful. Revelation describes a beautiful passage, and this could be metaphorical and figurative, but the ever-bearing tree of life that has 12 different types of fruits on it that will fruit each month. And so, you know, that metaphor, if it is one, which I think most of the things in the Bible are metaphor, but not necessarily exclusively.
Exactly.
I digress.
Yeah. Right.
It means that there's providence for us, you know, that there is a way of life every step of the way, every month of the year. There's a way to live off the earth. So
yeah, through all the seasons. Aren't there citrus trees where you can grow multiple citruses on one tree?
Yeah, so that's called a cocktail tree. And you can do that with citrus. You can do it with mango. You can have different varieties of mango on one tree.
How do you do that? Is that grafting too?
Yep, you do that through grafting. So you establish a rootstock, and that is the seed that, you know, roots and sprouts into the main branch. A lot of times when you have a citrus cocktail tree, it'll be a lemon rootstock. Lemons seem to be more cold hardy. And so a lot of times with orange growing, you're risking in the wintertime cold weather that could shock and potentially kill the trees. Unfortunately, this past winter, I called my orange guy in Louisiana. I said, "Hey man, how your trees looking?" He said, "Bro, they all died." He was devastated. And I was super sad too. But because we had a harsh winter this past, you know, 25 to 26 winter.
Yep.
So anyways, a lot of times they'll use lemon rootstock
from the Northeast moving down here, bringing their cold attitudes.
Well, that's interesting. Like hot and cold, as far as not just climate, but personality, like warmth of a personality is a real thing. Like, oh, he was being really cold to me.
Yep.
Like shut up and like tense and cold. So anyways, maybe you'll use a lemon seed to sprout, to root, germinate into like a lemon tree. Then what you do is you cut that and you graft on young branches of another fruit. So you can take a cutting of an orange tree, a grapefruit tree, pomelo, kumquat, snip, and then graft them all on. Now that's a careful process. I don't have too much experience grafting. I've done a couple mangoes before, but that's generally how you do it. As soon as they heal and give you another branch, you know, you can cut that, graft on another citrus, because citrus is sort of a Franken fruit. Genetically, it has all of those genetics in one seed. So it doesn't have a problem supporting a grapefruit on a lemon rootstock.
Very interesting. Where are you from originally, Seth?
I'm from Massachusetts too. I'm a Masshole too.
Oh, no way. I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's funny. So yeah, you get the whole cold personality. There's a guy who moved up from down south, and he does memes about, just the culture shock of dealing with people in New England and their just matter of factness. And I think the weather does have a lot to do with it. I mean, one of the main things people do up in Massachusetts is complain about the weather. It's like a pastime. And yeah, I think when you're down closer to like Garden of Eden, there's less to complain about, more to be grateful for, and you can be a little bit more warmer in your personality.
Man, I really noticed that when I lived in New Orleans, everyone's so nice. If you walk through a neighborhood and you see someone, you have to say hi. If you don't, something's weird. They're gonna look at you like, hello. And everybody sits on their porch because the weather's nice enough where you can do that year round pretty much. You sit on your porch, you get to know the neighbors, you say hi to people. So funny quick story is, after I lived there for a few years, one of the bands I was in, we got hired to play a gig up in New York City. So we flew up to New York, played for a night at the grand opening of something. But anyways, we noticed when we got there, first of all, we're wearing all bright colors, funky, New Orleans colors, teal and purple and gold and wacky looking stuff. But everyone in New York's wearing their, I call it the New York City uniform, which is all black. So visually, we're like sticking out, and we're trying to say hi to everybody in the street, and they're just not having it. People in New York are just kind of head down, earbuds in, walk, not talking to anybody, like won't even say hi if you say hi first. And I'm not saying everybody, obviously there's very warm people everywhere you go, but you get the idea. It was like a culture shock coming back to the North going, these people aren't even saying hi to me. This is weird. So you're totally right. The North has a reputation for being a little cold in more ways than one. So
yeah. And I think, I don't know. I just think it's a funny illustration of like how far away from natural, the way we're supposed to live as God intended. And, maybe the weather wasn't the way it is now, in past times. But once again, I mean, that's the whole point, is like reclaiming. So being aware of these things, and kind of reclaiming the way things should be in society is what I'm exploring. And we have this conversation all the time, like, what does it mean to be like a kingdom, living within the kingdom? And I look at every single aspect of our lives, and I see that if you took health, wellness, food, shelter, the way we do commerce, our law systems, every single one of them has been corrupted, and we need to rethink the way we're interacting. And it takes work. It usually takes work and intention, or like a shock to the system, kind of like 2020 was a shock to a lot of people's system, and it kind of woke them up out of the stupor that they're in. And I think right now is a uniquely ripe time where we're relatively at peace, and we have relative freedom to do this stuff and to link up and like build some stuff. So I think we really need to capitalize on it and make sure that, we're living out lives with intention and purpose as God intended, because maybe in the future this might not be available to us. 2020 was a precursor to something, and I think it was a big warning, for everybody. So that's essentially why, I'm doing this, and I'm talking to people, and I talk to a lot of people who are just kind of beat up and disenfranchised and depressed, and they don't think they can do it. They don't think they can have an effect. But like, if you think about it, all these sprawling neighborhoods in Florida, they'll just bulldoze, some forest and put up thousands of homes. The economy that's just there with those people is massive. The amount of labor, just potential to make money or do commerce or work is huge. So people don't realize how much power we have in numbers if we all just kind of put aside our differences and and tried to work towards a higher purpose together.
I totally agree. And that's a good segue into talking about growing your own, because in this section here of my book, there's a page called Gardening Tips and Resources. And number 5 here is befriend your fellow gardeners and get to know your neighbors. This is a big one. I should have actually put this up at number 1, because before you even plant, before you even decide what to do with your land, it's a great idea to just walk around your neighborhood and try to see if you can see any other gardens, because you might get some really good ideas. First of all, you might go, oh my God, they're growing peaches. I didn't know you can grow peaches in Vermont. Turns out you can, you know? So you might be surprised by what people are growing around you, and you might get ideas. Or, oh my God, look at all those beautiful flowers in a row amongst the trees. Or look at how they angled look at how they made herbs in a spiral. Or like, so you might get some cool idea from your neighbors. But more importantly than that is you're going to start to grow a network. You knock on their door and say, hey, I couldn't help notice you have an amazing garden. And then some way you can connect. Do you have any seeds? Or do you collect seeds? Do you have any tips? You know, I'm thinking about what to grow. What did you learn in your first year? You know, ask them if they'd be down to just help you, show you something that helped them. And turns out you might find that they might be very generous. You know, if they have that much love for their garden, they might have an equal love for someone else's garden. So befriending your community, finding out who's around you that grows food is huge. And then once you have enough to share, that's where you turn it around and you start giving to your community, right? You knock on people's door. Hey, you like zucchini? That's the classic one. Zucchini always grows in abundance and excess. Like if you have one zucchini plant, oftentimes it produces more than someone likes to eat. So they're going to give it away, right? So it can just pay back to the community because of the self-replicating process. But I would say befriend your gardeners, befriend your neighbors, and you can even seek out a community garden. So if you don't have your own house, if you don't have your own yard or land, there are so many community gardens out there, and it's a growing thing. So I highly encourage people to find a community garden to get started. That's what I did when I lived in Lowell. I joined Mill City Grows Community Garden, and I was with them for 5 years, and it was beautiful. And then each year they kept adding other gardens and new neighborhoods. And so I was able to get one closer to my house and meet new people. And, you know, community gardens are so valuable because I see in a local food system, that's what we have. We have a place where everyone comes together, shares resources, inspires each other, and it's like a food growing hub. We might have our own little plot, but there's water there for everyone to share. There's tools for everyone to share. So we don't have to go buy everything ourselves.
Right.
So get involved with the community. That is a huge part of growing your own food.
Agreed. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's like the economies of scale. Like you said, if each one of the neighbors has to get all their own tools and stuff like that versus, you know, sharing or coming up with some sort of system. In the model that I shared with you, the whole point of the 200% sustainability is that the overall community, like the common land of the community, would have food production that would be managed by like employees, like people who work that micro farm. But then each house would have a food forest. Now, this ties into what you're talking about and to my idea, and that is some people are just not, you know, inclined, or they're not going to want to garden like at all, but they have other skills and they do other things. So to your point of knowing your gardener, like a lot of people feel, I don't know, like they're imposing, or they'll go ask the neighbor. But at the end of the day, we all have something to offer, and even like companionship. You know, some people might just not have someone to hang out with and talk to, and you might be an ear that they needed to get something off their chest. So like, don't ever feel like you're imposing, you know, neighbors. That's the whole point of being a neighbor. But then in the model I was discussing, you'd have your own food forest, which obviously is yours. You know, it's your land. You could work it, you could share with the neighbors ideas. Or if you're, once again, one of those people who's not inclined, you could pull from the resources of the main common areas employee stack to come work your land. You just, pay a nominal fee. They're already there doing it, and you have a beautiful, flourishing food forest, which looks beautiful, smells beautiful. You can go pick your own fruit when it's right, but you don't have to necessarily do all the work. So I think you have to accommodate all the different people's personality types. But no matter what, you should be promoting this lifestyle with whatever it is you do, whether you're actually doing the farming or not, or you're just supporting the people. Go to the local farmers markets, support the people who are doing the growing, and just feed with your time, your effort, and your money into the good and not the bad.
Yeah, and that's a great point about sharing your energy and time. Oftentimes farms love to get volunteers, and they'll give you a box of food at the end of the day. I used to do that a lot, volunteering on farms. And then the box of food was a bonus for me. It wasn't really why I did it, but you can work out an exchange quite easily.
Yeah, and if you're learning how to farm, like all the people we talk to at our local farmers markets, same, like if you ask them this or that, they'll be like, come on over. I'll show you how I do it, and especially if you homeschool, that's another thing, added benefit. Like when you were saying about Easter egg hunting for mangoes, like imagine the homeschool aspect to that, where you have a bunch of kids in the neighborhood who are homeschooling and they're living on an abundant food forest farm, or just taking your kids, whether you homeschool them or not, to these farms, and you can all do like a family volunteer day or something of that nature. And you learn so much. You're in with nature. They're finding out where food comes from, and they're basically living in abundance. They're seeing the abundance of God's creation. And these are things that we can do right now. Like I'm trying to build something and have it baked into like a system, but it's really all about what you do day to day, where your attention goes. So yeah, I like to, whenever I do these like interviews, is partially to get the word out of what I'm trying to do and just seed the idea. But then it's also partially to encourage people if they're just in a certain state of mind right now, feeling disempowered, to turn that around and be empowered.
Yeah, the only logical response in my mind to the crazy technocracy, tyranny, overstepping human rights is localized food systems.
Yep.
Well, we don't have to rely on the system as much if we got trees everywhere on every single street corner. And that's not unrealistic. I was just in Mexico, and there was this little tiny neighborhood on the Bacalar Lagoon, hours from the airport, and there were fruit trees on every single block. Multiple mangoes, breadfruit, papaya, bananas, coconuts, mamey sapote, sapodilla, like endless. And what was interesting is that these people didn't even live a fruit lifestyle. They mostly ate chips and pork and Coca-Cola. And I wish I was joking. I truly wish I was joking, or that was an exaggeration, but it's just not, unfortunately. So that just goes to show, obviously Mexico has great weather, but you can still plant way more fruit trees than we have up north. So let's get to it, people. Plant some trees this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who do that. They call it like guerrilla farming, right? They go out and, seed common areas and things of that nature. I think, the powers that be, obviously pressure from above, they would like go eradicate that or prevent people from doing that. You know what I mean? Which is part of the problem. Like they'll arrest you for like planting on public land or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think, to your point, I kind of am evangelizing, incorporating this into just like, without getting into the reasons why we need this right now as such an emergency. It just makes sense. It just anyone could see, if I buy a home and it comes with food production, water storage, filtration, and everything is collected and handled on site. When I'm going to buy like a house for $500,000 and I'm going to pay that mortgage for 30 years, and all I'm getting is a house, versus I'm getting a neighborhood, a community, food, production, water. So the majority of the hierarchy of needs is taken care of. And that way you're not living in a constant state of fear that you won't have something to eat. I think it just makes sense. But obviously, for people who do see what's coming, over the horizon, the time to we're kind of the people who are going to have to like build this for the people, for the unfortunate people who are kind of ignorant to what's happening. And then once these things start happening, like CBDCs, siphoning where people can go, where they can spend their money, then people just have to make a choice. But at the end of the day, it'd be better if we had some infrastructure, some community built, which already exists in farmers markets, farmers and things like that. But the more we can build it now, before this stuff comes down and gets too intense, the better off we're all going to be when these things, or maybe we stave them off, because at the end of the day, they only do what they know they can get away with. That, I think that's what a lot of these tests were. Like 2020 was like, how far can we push it before there's an active backlash that, threatens our control system. So yeah. What can we get into that a little bit? Like, based on what I was talking about, like a system where there's houses that have individual food forests and then maybe like a micro farm. Do you have any insight into that? Because I'm a builder. I'm not a farmer. I can envision it. I do know people who do permaculture, who do food forests. I'm also, as a general contractor, I am only as good as the people who I work with, and I thoroughly know that. Like, I'm always less intelligent than the people who are working with me. Like the HVAC guys know more about HVAC than I do, obviously. You know what I mean? So what do you think about that idea? Like its viability? Do you think it's something that's viable, cost effective, sustainable, things of that nature?
100%. 100%. A community-focused food forest and micro food forests sort of interacting into a global, a bigger network. That is what I see as the kingdom of heaven. That's what I see as the Garden of Eden. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. On earth.
Yep.
That means the kingdom of heaven isn't some place you can only go when you die.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Our charge is to build that here and now. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. How many times did Jesus say that? How many times did John the Baptist say that? Right? That is the gospel. That's the good news.
Yes.
Kingdom of heaven is here. Right? So are fruit trees sustainable? 100%. Because like we talked about earlier, you don't have to till them. They're perennial. They last more than one season. So that would be the first thing, is to actually diversify the types of fruits and vegetables that we grow. So if I were to design a food forest or a garden in a small plot, there would be fruit trees, perennial fruit trees. There would be annual fruit vines like tomatoes, melons, grapes, right? And grapes can be perennial too. Grapes can last more than one season, but they're vines and they're shorter lived. But anyways, diversity. There would be herbs. There would be vegetable beds, right? Because vegetables, herbs, leafy greens, and annual fruits, these are things that grow so quickly, right? So it doesn't make sense to not grow them. They grow so quick that you can plant a seed and within 2 months, you are eating a juicy melon. Like, that is mind-blowing. That's amazing. But on the other hand, we do want the trees, right? If the weather can mess up the vines, the flowers, pollination cycle, any number of things, we like to diversify our assets. That's what keeps us safer over the long run. Okay, these 4 things failed. Well, at least I had this one thing. At least this one tree didn't die. Oh my God, all my fruit trees died except this one, this cold hardy one. This apple tree is such a boss. The kale didn't freeze, right? But the mint did, or whatever. So diversity is going to help us be more sustainable and enjoy, be more enjoyable over the long term, because it's not fun to just eat apples, right? I mean, it's fun to eat apples, but if I can eat persimmons the next day and oranges the day after that. So diversity, variety, a mix of the perennial and the annual crops is just going to help us be as sustainable as possible. And I mean, your vision of community-centered food production is perfect, just because it plays into the idea of knowing your neighbor, right? And feeding people. And not just in the case of a catastrophic, banking failure or something like that, but let's say somebody just loses their job or gets into a car accident or gets sick, and then their neighbors can come and help them and just bring them food that they produce free on their land.
Yeah.
Right. So helping your neighbor.
There's nothing more supportive than bringing people food.
Yeah.
Yeah. To sustain them and get them by.
Yeah. I follow a lot of gardening Instagram accounts, and there's some very popular reels where people go, hey, I'm going to make a fruit basket for my neighbor. And they walk around and they put a little bit of this in there, passion fruit, a little
revolutionary.
And then there's so many likes and comments. It's like, that's because in our nature, deep in our bones, we know that's how we're supposed to be living. We know, even with you mentioned this earlier, all the packaged stuff is a cheap analog or a cheap imitation of God's food. So, but even the grocery store, when you walk down these lit aisles in a straight row and you reach up for your cereal and put it in your basket, is that not the same exact motion of reaching up into an apple tree, picking down an apple and putting it into your basket?
Yeah.
Wow. My phone dinged red as I said that. Let me just turn this up.
What's funny? The more I've been getting closer to God, and this is just me personally, I've been having a real revitalization spiritually the last couple of years. The more I see that, Satan, the enemy, the deceiver, the whole goal is to replicate God's thing, but like his way. And it's so apparent now in everything that I see that it's almost like pathetic in a way. It's like a pathetic attempt, to recreate what God created in a negative, destructive way, as opposed to like a bountiful, fruitful way.
So we're ruining
can't unsee it.
Exactly. Producing these cereals where we're pouring glyphosate on the fields to produce this refined wheat. We're adding folic acid and all these iron shavings back in. That is a cheap attempt at creating something sweet and carb filled to break our fast, right? Breakfast food is a classic. Like in my generation, it was cereal. But fruit gives you even better, cleaner energy, the same type of energy, because it's sugar and water, just like the milk in the cereal. Interestingly, the milk has more fat, but regardless, you get the point. And the grocery store aisles imitate the orchard aisles. There are aisles in an orchard. Not always you can make cool patterns with them, but how easy is it if you make 2 straight lines of trees and you just literally walk down it and you pick what you want when it's ready? You walk to the end, you circle back around, you get your basket of food. So, your idea for the community-centered food forests, it's inevitable. It's not only a good idea, but it's happening. It's going to happen. And I can't wait for that. I'm here for it.
Awesome. What do you think about labor? Do you think it's similar to like landscaping in terms of like how many people would be required to tend to and prune and kind of manage an actual food forest type farm?
I think to produce enough just for your family doesn't require much labor. It's only going to require the amount of people that you're feeding.
Right.
Because to prune a fruit tree, you do that one day out of the year.
Really?
Maybe 2. Mangoes, you'll tip the mangoes, cut off a lot of the buds so they re-bud the way you want them to. And then maybe at the end of the season, you do heavier pruning, bring it back so that doesn't get so tall, because it's just harder to harvest tall trees. So maybe you're going to prune a tree 2 days out of the year.
Wow.
That's 2 days. I mean, And then
Yeah.
the rest of the time you let nature do its thing. A lot of times you don't even need to water your trees.
That
Depending
was
on where you
another thing
live.
I wanted to talk about was watering. Yeah.
Yeah, depending on where you live, sometimes you don't need to water. Like once the mangoes establish here in South Florida, they're tapped into the groundwater. They're good. They do not need irrigation. Now, if you don't have groundwater so close to the surface, a lot of times you might need to irrigate your trees. So it kind of just depends where you live. You
Yeah.
know, avocado trees in California, you got to water them a lot. California's just way drier. The spring might be way, way down underground. As opposed to South Florida, once those avocado trees are tapped into our groundwater, which is like 6 feet below the ground, they do their thing. They're fine. You know, and there's enough rain. And mangoes even love a dry season, right? So it's in the wintertime when it's pretty dry for us, mangoes love that, you know. So water, though, there are great ways to collect water. How strange is it? And do you come across this as a contractor? Some towns and cities, it's illegal to collect rainwater. Is that true?
I haven't come across that. I've seen articles and stuff like that. The big thing right now is they actually want you to collect your rainwater on your site as opposed to giving it back to, like, kicking it into a storm drain system in a lot of cities, because the storm drain systems get overwhelmed. But they don't want you to collect it and use it. They want you to build like a giant Cultec system, like where it can leach out and go back into the ground, as opposed to kicking it into some sort of like municipality system. But I haven't had any problems anywhere I've ever worked collecting rainwater. I don't know what's up with those little towns. You know, I see those municipalities giving tickets and stuff. I would have a big problem with that personally if I lived in that town. But yeah, I've never come across that. Thank God.
Yeah, so that can be a challenge for some people. You know, in some places, like I looked up in New Mexico, for example, how easy it is to build a well.
Mhm.
And, you know, there's some quotes online for like $50,000 to get a well dug, because you might need to dig 50 feet down into the ground to find the water. So, you know, I get it. It can be a big hurdle for people to build a well. But, you know, that's the old school way to do it. There's groundwater everywhere.
Yeah.
And there are springs in every state. So that's one thing that Florida taught me, was that springs are so abundant. The springs in Central and North Florida, by the way, are some of the most pristine, purest springs you'll ever go to. But they're so abundant that it really taught me, like, wait a minute, there's springs everywhere. There's springs in the spring water in Colorado, Massachusetts, Maine. You know, Poland Springs was the big brand that we used to drink as a kid up in Massachusetts, and that's spring water from Maine. And, you know, there's spring water everywhere. I was actually in the Southwest in Arizona with my family, and I mentioned that there were springs under the ground, and they didn't believe me. They're like, no, this is a desert. There are no springs here. I said, no. And I actually pointed straight to a plaque. We were already at a park, and the plaque was talking about the springs that was directly underneath us.
Yeah.
So, and if you think about the word spring, a spring is like an upward force or like an outward force, right? You compact a spring and then it forces the pressure outward. That's what's happening with the water. It is being forcefully ejected up toward the surface for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, there are resources out there like findaspring.org where you can literally see where they've been mapped. You can fill up your water. I wouldn't recommend drinking water from any spring, because a lot of times that water picks up heavy minerals along the way, and you get hard water, which is another way to say water with minerals dissolved in it that can deposit in your body if you drink too much of it. There's a great author named Norman Walker. He was a health and raw food teacher for a long time. He lived to be past 100. And he's got a great book called Water Can Undermine Your Health. And he talks about the hard water that's out there and also like polluted tap water. So you got to be careful. Like, water is life. And at the same time, there can be microplastics in water. There can be contaminants. There can be heavy, harsh chemicals. There can be like too much sulfur. right? Sometimes water will smell like an egg if it's coming out of the ground fresh. That's sulfur, so you don't always want to be drinking spring water. But here in Florida, I do because it is so clean, and I'm literally swimming on top of the spring. Like I can feel the pressure coming out of the spring. Some of these springs, Chris, 70 million gallons a day.
Yeah. We were just in Ocala at Silver Spring 2 weekends ago.
Beautiful.
And it was unbelievable. Yeah, it's a sight to behold, for sure. Well, I think that's more case why Florida is Garden of Eden candidate right there, because there's just overwhelming abundance. But no, water management. So number one, if the water feeds a fruit tree and then you get your water from the fruit, it has filtered all those issues. If the tree didn't die or doesn't have a problem from the water, most likely it's the water you get from the fruit now has filtered all that. So that's one way to handle that. But yeah, when the beauty of like being a contractor and starting from scratch is if we have a lot of acreage to work with, we can divert and put water where we need it, build ponds, have pumps out of the ponds for irrigation, which is what they do where I am. They're very good at that, like the developers up here, as having irrigation systems fed from all the rainwater runoff. Obviously, they use a ton of chemicals, and there's a lot of bad stuff they do too. But yeah, managing the rainwater collection and then just having a well storing water. And then when you build a house, you can easily put a whole house water filter in there without too much added cost. If you incorporate these things into your building methods, they become less costly because you're doing more of it. There's an economy of scale. So yeah. Well, this was awesome, Seth. I'm really glad that we got to talk. I think this was like an intro into, doing things and building things. I like to do these videos as a reference too. Like when I'm talking to someone, I can now reference them to this video, and it's like a wealth of knowledge that, maybe if I don't have time or I can't think of some of the things, I can say, hey, go check out this video. So I'm extremely grateful to have you as a resource. Is there any personal, goals or anything you're working on at the moment that, I could help out with, or anyone else could kind of help you with?
Well, if anyone likes the information that we presented today, they are welcome to purchase the Fruit Companion. This second edition is just being released now, in June. This is my release party, kind of. I didn't even set like a hard date, and I got to do better at promoting. But if anyone is interested, thefruitcompanion.com is where you can get a paperback or an ebook download, or both. And some other projects I'm working on are some courses. So I'm starting to teach a lot more. And I'm going to be teaching the Genesis 129 diet. So I'm going to be doing this in a couple of places. One will be on my YouTube channel called The School of Unlearning. And another place is going to be in a school, SKOOL, community called The Way. And this is one that's set up by Cameron Waters of Christspiracy, which is a great film about essentially asking the question, how would Jesus kill an animal? So this is the intersection of biblical teaching and vegetarianism and veganism. And if you want to learn more about that, especially as it pertains to, early Christianity, Jesus, his apostles, how they were all vegetarian, how they lived a certain lifestyle about eating to be closer to God and to live within his commandments, do not kill. Join us in the Way school community, and we'll be dropping the Genesis 129 diet there, as well as a lot of other great courses. So yeah, follow me on Instagram, The Fruit Companion, and I'll kind of link out my projects there. But yeah, Chris, right now it's a lot of teaching, and I'm just trying to build these courses. I teach some homeschool courses too for younger kids, including fruit-based education. And I have a class called Universal Arts, which goes into the cosmos. And then we sort of zoom in smaller and smaller to the individual while we study Earth and everything along the way. That's really what I'm working on. And if you guys want to support, just follow on the Fruit Companion. And bro, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Are those courses on your website? Or how do
Not
people
yet.
get access to that? Yeah.
So join the Way school community,
Okay.
SKOOL. And then I also have my own school community called the School of Unlearning. So find
So that's
either
your
one.
YouTube channel and that's a SKOOL community. Okay. Gotcha.
That's right. Yep. The School of Unlearning, because I think to learn a lot of this information, we have to unlearn other information that we were given, that we've been conditioned into accepting, and it might have been wrong. Right. So for example, quickly, the fact that you need animal protein to be strong, to survive, to get all your nutrients for anything, that is a myth that I had to unlearn before learning and replacing that knowledge with more accurate, more natural knowledge of nature, that fruits and vegetables provide us everything we need. In addition to God's word and the elements, air, water, sunshine.
Yeah, no, I think we talked about that almost right at the beginning, that we've been indoctrinated, and to do any of this stuff to get closer to the Lord, we were indoctrinated by the enemy, in my opinion, infiltrated this stuff to purposely take us away from the Lord. So you have to kind of think through those things, like why were these things indoctrinated into us, as you're breaking those paradigms down and getting closer to God, and honoring him through diet and a lot of other things that we do. So yeah, I'll get all those links correct, and I'll put them in the show notes and stuff like that. But yeah, man, it was a pleasure to have you on. I'm looking forward to talking more, and I'd love to do a project. We have one in Central South Florida we're trying to kick off, in Sebring. So I'm looking to see that thing blossom and flourish, and it'd be a pleasure to get your insight, and if not just take courses, get you out there to do some consulting and stuff. So yeah, it was a
I'm
pleasure.
happy to help. I think what you're doing is amazing. I love the concepts. And so keep bringing it to life, keep building that kingdom, and keep doing what you're doing, bringing the information. You don't have to have a podcast. You could just be a builder. But I love that you're bridging these things by not only building in the day, but then taking this information and speaking it to the people.
Yeah. Amen, brother. Well, thank you very much, and have a great night.
Amen. Take care.